Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Mess. So, Terasic series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and I've got an extra exciting Sega Saturn FPGA update video for you guys this evening, because there's been not one but two core updates today, and there's been about 4 this week. These have fundamentally changed the entire structure of the Sega Saturn core as far as the memory is concerned. It has increased the compatibility and playability across the entire hardware base, and it has made this feel like it is getting very close to the home stretch as far as being finished is concerned. And today we have over 95% of the North American Sega Saturn library tested and playable. There's very few games that will not boot on this core, and there's been a lot of improvements as well. Last time we talked about Shining Force 3, I told you that it had seen improvements, but you really couldn't get past a battle because the game would freeze. And this is one of the most requested games to test every single core. The great part is, and I'm going to bring you through an entire battle here, you can now play this game much further. You can get through battles, you can execute all the attacks, all of the special moves, all of the heals and magics, and the core does not freeze whatsoever. From the intro cutscene here into the battle, all the way through the different in-engine cutscenes that you're going to see when you actually pick your attack, everything just 100% works. And that is because SRG-320 has gone through, pivoted on the RAM architecture and the code, and kept iterating on it until the point where the improvements and processes were so much more streamlined and work so much better. There are now an absolute ton of games on the Sega Saturn core that you can just play from start to finish, getting a real Sega Saturn hardware experience out of them. There might be a tiny visual glitch here or there in some games, but for the most part, you are going to be hard-pressed to realize that this is MiSTer FPGA and not real Sega Saturn hardware. And you'll see here all of these different loads between the screen going to black and going into this 3D version of the game. They all work perfectly fine. It used to be that that was a very rough spot for freezing. The core would hang when it would transition from this sort of 3D overworld and 2D sprite-based look to this fully 3D modeled character combat here, and a lot of these special attacks would just 100% freeze the core in its tracks. That seems to be down to some implementation in the RAM. Maybe it was not reading the information quickly enough. I haven't gone through all the GitHub notes to fully understand and break down the code. But what has happened is just the massive improvements in this core. We're getting so many updates so regularly now, and this is the first time that I would probably recommend it to the casual person to just start playing the Sega Saturn core and enjoying games. You might still see a freeze here and there, you might still see a visual glitch, but I feel safe now to recommend this to people that aren't just testing the cores to see how they're doing, to go and start enjoying some Sega Saturn. And it has been a long road. This is back on 8/10/2022 and 9/30/2022. That's how long I've been running these videos, how long the core has been in development, and how long we've been previewing these things. This has been a massive amount of time. It's been over a year and a half. Or stuff like Super Tempo here, that we're not working on the most recent cores. Now, if there's any difference in this between real Sega Saturn hardware, I absolutely would have no idea whatsoever. All of the graphics are working, the music is great, the controls are there. You could put this side by side with a real piece of Sega Saturn hardware, and if I didn't see what I was playing on, I don't think I would be able to guess whatsoever. Outside of the fact that the audio levels in this are a little bit quieter than a real Sega Saturn, but you could adjust that in the core menu to make it louder, and then you really would have absolutely no idea. And I finished some of my favorite Sega Saturn games of all time on this core recently, and they were spectacular. Stuff like Saturn Bomberman and Bubble Symphony, you can play them to the credits scroll, and I could not tell whatsoever it wasn't real Sega Saturn hardware. It felt exactly the same to me. Now, of course, this core is not done, and the update all variant right now is still going to be the October build, so if you do want to play this, I will have a modern setup guide coming soon to get you testing and playing before the changes bring over to update all. But honestly, you definitely want to be using this core. If you're still using the update all version, I recommend you definitely do the manual installation, which I will show sometime next week. Leave me a comment down below if you guys want to see that. But honestly here, even in Super Tempo, from the backgrounds to the sprites to everything else, this is just sheer perfection. It is so impressive how quickly this core has gone and improved itself since October, and the audio on this game is both charming as well as perfect to my ears. Listen, and I'll be right back. I mean, it's definitely weird audio, but it works in the context of super tempo. But let's move back over to Dead or Alive, a game that I've tested recently. A lot of the newest core revisions, seemingly down to the RAM, have removed all of the slowdown in this game. It used to be that every once in a while, when you and your opponent would attack at the same time, the game would almost drop down to half speed. It was like it would go from 60 frames per second to 30. That has basically alleviated itself here, and this feels to be on par with real Sega Saturn hardware. Now, do be aware this is an interlaced video mode that the Saturn can do, and because this is not on a CRT television, you're always going to get those interlacing lines across a capture, or if you play on your LCD television. That's just inherently to how the image is drawn, but that has tripped a few people up in past tests wondering why there's all these lines across the image. That is just the interlacing, because there's absolutely no deinterlacing going on here. Now, I could deinterlace this in post and hide it from you, but that really wouldn't be the real result of the core. But you can see here in the battles, the fluidity is just up, and this just starts feeling like the real Dead or Alive. Now, there is still a tiny bit of slowdown, but that can still inherently happen on real hardware. I've seen it, and I checked in the background, and it does replicate itself. This is fundamentally so much better than the last time we tested this, and the last couple times we tested it as well. And this is just so much fun to see, because the Sega Saturn has incredible 3D games, incredible 2D games, and games that utilize both at the same time, because all of the background here on Dead or Alive is going to be 2D based versus the arcade Model 2 original, which used polygons for the entire image. So it is a nice mixture of both. But it's just so incredible to see these improvements come, and like I said, in like the last 10 days, this core has just improved so much. The idea that 95% of the North American library can be played today is just such a huge accomplishment, because the Sega Saturn, again, is a very complicated piece of hardware. Sure, it doesn't have the same raw horsepower as the Nintendo 64 core, but the actual silicon architecture of this thing and how complex it is to actually make it get working is absurdly hard as far as this generation of game hardware is concerned. Or take something like Astal here. We tested this a year and a half ago. I went through my old captures and pulled this out, and that's how long this core has been in active development for. It is just wild to think, because this to me feels like 4 or 6 months at the top end of that range. It's really hard to believe that I've been talking about the Sega Saturn core for almost 2 years now, and it has been absolutely fun. Or something like Sonic R here. This is footage off one of the first cores ever to exist, when the project was basically announced and a core that would do a few things came out. Graphical glitches didn't run at full speed, but it was so much fun to see. Now, a note on Guardian Heroes, because a lot of you asked about this. Yes, the previous 2 cores had a regression, and they made Guardian Heroes unplayable, but SRG 320 went through, fixed all of those regressions up again, and once again, Guardian Heroes is perfection. I have played about a third of this game in the background in my spare time, and I have had no issues with it whatsoever. The graphics are drawing correctly, it sounds correct, all of the controls are there. Now, I haven't finished the game, so I can't promise that you can see the credits scroll, but I feel like there's not going to be anything else that's happening in the background that would cause me not to be able just to see which games can be beat. But I'm sure in the next couple weeks, as we go through that spreadsheet and people start actually playing more games versus testing them, we're going to see that completable list grow exponentially. And that's where so much of the fun in this is for me personally, testing these games, keeping up with the updates, sharing them with you, and finding out where the core has improved. And that's why I really do feel confident at this recent core revision today, like an hour and a half before this video started its voiceover. I think you can just go and play Sega Saturn. This is feeling very similar to the Nintendo 64 core, where the things that need to be patched up are only keeping a few select titles from actually being playable, and there's definitely some graphical glitches in the background of some games. It really does feel like it's going to be a photo finish between the Sega Saturn core and the Nintendo 64 core as to which one is capital D done on paper. And trust me, it's not like anyone's competing here, it just seems to be the timing that's working out. But again, in this Guardian Heroes footage right here, I don't see anything I don't like. If you see anything or notice anything at all, leave me a comment down below, because I definitely depend on your eyes as much as I do my own to spot issues. But even if there is a tiny little graphical glitch, it's just so hard to detect. Even the FMVs are working exactly as you'd expect them to here. So this just feels like a great way to play one of Sega Saturn's best 2D games of all time. And that is coming from somebody who has a Sega Saturn 3 feet to the right of them right now, hooked up to a 20-inch PVM, and a copy of Guardian Heroes on my shelf in the other room. I don't need the MiSTer FPGA Core to enjoy this game as it was originally intended. I've got all the hardware in the world to do it, but I still love MiSTer. or you'll see here in some of the oldest tests, Die Hard Arcade, once you would get inside, the game would slow to a crawl. You get all these polygonal issues coming in, basically polygons stretching to infinity, and even that was pitched up like 6 months ago or so. It's so wild just to be able to compare this footage side by side, and to know that I was talking about Die Hard Arcade last summer when I was swimming in the lake, and boy do I wish that's what I was doing today. Particularly not a nice day in Chicago if you were wondering. But it's just, again, amazing to know that this is actually even taking place. Sega Saturn was considered to be impossible, just like Nintendo 64 Core was. And even when we used to get things like this a year ago in Resident Evil, this door on a blue background with all of this weird video rendering, we were so happy just to see this. Any sort of signs of progress just made us happy. And speaking of zombies, one of the other games that's recently been made playable is Corpse Killer. You either remember this from back in the day or you don't. You either love it or you absolutely hate it. There is no in-between on Corpse Killer. It is just one of those games. Everyone knows what it is and they have a firm opinion, so leave yours down below. I would be curious. I had this on Sega CD back when I was a kid, and I absolutely fell in love with it, and even though fundamentally it's not a very good game, it's a very fun game that holds a lot of nostalgia for me. All of this ridiculous acting, the Tom Zito direction, it just goes to make something that is absolute jank cheesiness of the highest order and of the most enjoyable manner. And the best part is, all of that jank cheesy dialogue and music sounds great. Listen, and I'll be right back with more games.
Balana zombie fupa. Kenwa, welcome wagon. Light 'em up.
I swear I have heard those scream sound effects in so many video games from the 90s, some of my favorites of all time, so if you can think of another game they appeared in, leave me a comment down below. I'm sure you will definitely recognize them from somewhere. But as far as Corpse Killer is concerned, it's definitely not going to be on any Sega Saturn hidden gem lists or best games of all time lists, but that doesn't matter. This is another game that never used to work that now does work. And we talk about 95% playability of the Sega Saturn North American library, we're just not talking about the hits, we're talking about stuff like Corpse Killer, because to have a complete core, you can't just have all the best things in the world playable, you need to have these fringe edge cases playable as well, because how many people are going to come through and really want to play Corpse Killer? Me, Andy D, who captured it, who's also a fan, and probably 2 others of you out there. But everything needs to work 100% of the time you want to play it for a core to be complete, and stuff like this just goes towards that goal. But a game that everyone's going to want to complete, that is now playable again, that again looks 100% like real hardware, is going to be Rayman. These are some of the best 2D visuals of the era in my opinion, and I absolutely love this game, and on Sega Saturn it is amazing as well. It kind of makes me wonder when anyone's going to retake up the Atari Jaguar core. Definitely not anywhere near as good of a library as the Sega Saturn is, but it's still something that is pending for MiSTer, and I do hope to see it completed one day. But you tell me down below, what's the other core that's in progress or not made yet you'd love to see, because MiSTer still has a lot of growing room to have a lot of fun going on. But everything in Rayman, again, just seems to be 100% patched up. This is a game that we tested and we kind of played around with. Even these crawls here work 100% of the time, but with continued core development, there were some regressions in this game, and those have all been fixed up. And now with the new RAM rewrites as well, people are seeing a lot more success on the 2.5V module. It's still not a guarantee that you're going to have 100% compatibility depending on your module speed, and I still do recommend having a 2.9V or a 3.0V to get the best performance out of this core. But if you have that older RAM stick, you're going to get better performance out of what is here. And if you have an instance in which the game is not running well, but other people say it is, that have the more modern RAM, that's when you're going to know it is down to the speed limitations of your RAM and not the core in and of itself. But again, this is just such a milestone. This is back when I did the video on the entire North American Nintendo 64 library being playable. This core started like a year and a half ago with 2 games that barely did anything whatsoever. We are now at the situation where 95% of the North American library can be sat down and played. I don't know if they're all completable, we will find that out in time. And testing is ongoing with the Japanese library as well, but people started with the North American one because it is smaller, and those are the games that everyone remembers, and there's so many deep cuts in the Saturn library in Japan. It's going to be a much bigger project, but it will get done. Every single one of these games will be tested, and different bug reports will be submitted to GitHub to SRG320 to pick through, because he does seem to basically fix things from those, and the Sega Saturn core will continue to get better every single iteration. But right now, this core is feeling like it is in the 9th inning, and the game is going to be done soon, and I definitely feel like the Sega Saturn is going to be the winner. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. If you need any help setting the core up, leave me a comment that you want that core setup guide. But short of that, go play some Sega Saturn because it's amazing. Bye-bye.